Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another Insights from Women Leaders series. My name is Rola Kaakeh. I'm going to be the host and talking to the guest leaders in these sessions. Now, a little background about the series. We launched the series in October of 2020 to highlight the journeys and contributions of various women leaders from across the globe who share their insights on a range of topics impacting their industries, our communities, and their role in shaping the future. Now, our guests have included leaders from various prestigious and reputable institutions from across the globe. Now, their backgrounds are diverse, their accomplishments many, and the insights and perspectives they provided are extremely valuable. Now, the goal of the series is to learn from women thought leaders and decision makers to empower current and future leaders, both men and women, to positively impact organizations and communities. Now, diversity of thought, experiences, industries, education, and training is important to us as it highlights the mosaic of perspectives represented in different settings that help drive decision-making and positive change. Now, I will have about a 40-minute conversation with the leaders structured using questions we've traditionally asked our guest leaders. We ask the guest leaders similar questions throughout the series. This allows you to see the differences in responses and lived experiences. After that, I ask questions sent to us from the public prior to the session, and we have several of those today. Now it's time to welcome our guest leader. Today, I am very pleased to welcome Margo Warren, Head of Policy at Access to Medicine Foundation. Margo liaisons with governments, private foundations, and multilateral organizations that are actively working to improve global health and access to medicine in order to share the foundation's research findings and identify key opportunities for collaboration and change making. She represents the foundation on advisory committees, as well as the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator Emergency Oxygen Taskforce, with a consortium of partners, including the WHO and various other UN agencies. Now, prior to joining the foundation, Margo worked for the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care in Ontario, Canada, in a strategic health policy. In her position at the ministry, Margo led the development of new initiatives pertaining to improving access to medicine, health system strengthening, and capacity building. Margo has held various health research and policy positions focused on partnership for development, improving access to care, and addressing the social determinants of health in Canada and globally. Margo holds a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in international development with a focus on health policy. She's also features on the most recent list of Canadian Women in Global Health, recognizing the achievements of established leaders in global health. Now, anyone who's known me and my passion for access to medicine, I'm extremely excited about this conversation and so happy to welcome you, Margo.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me here today. It's really nice to be part of this series, and I think, as we talked about, it's such a good idea to have all of these different conversations with different people, and I think it's really valuable. So, very excited to be here today. Thank you.
Of course. So we're going to start, and like we mentioned before, there's similar questions, but we always start with the same first question. And now hearing your background and everything, and I think for some of our guest leaders, just kind of sitting back and kind of self-reflecting, did you expect to be where you are today?
The short answer is no. I graduated in a very terrible economy, and I remember really having to put in a lot of effort to even land kind of an unpaid internship in a very expensive city. It was tough. I knew that I wanted to work in global health, but I wasn't sure exactly how to get there or where was. And I think there are a lot of opportunities when it comes to global health, and it can be tough to sort of narrow it down. But I had a lot of moments along the way where I kind of questioned, am I doing this right? Am I in the right position? How do I get to where I want to go? But I decided to kind of focus on collecting really good opportunities and honing the skills that I felt sort of came naturally to me, instead of kind of always focusing on the things that I wasn't as good at. So I purposely sort of took positions that got me closer and closer to exclusively performing the tasks that I felt I was naturally better at on a more regular basis. And following that structure, I'm really happy with where I am today, but it certainly took a lot of turns along the way, and I certainly didn't expect that this is where I would end up. Also being Canadian and now living in Amsterdam, I don't think I would have predicted that particular career route, but yeah, I'm very happy to be where I am today.
I really like what you said, Margo, in terms of you focused on the skills that you were good at. I think often, and over the years prior, I know going through kind of my career as well, people used to always talk about, well, what are you not good at, and kind of focus on building that. But how you mentioned, and I think there's a lot of conversations around what are you really good at, and build upon that and put yourself in positions and intentional, which is really great. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the future in mind, and then we'll come back and talk a lot more about what you're currently doing and working on. Now, when you think about the future, what's in your future? What do you want your legacy to be?
I certainly hope that I'm able to make a clear impact on the way that the pharmaceutical industry and also governments really view access to medicine. It's been a topic that I've been really passionate about for my whole career, and I want that to really be my legacy. I think sometimes even changing one person's mind or helping them think differently about their own role and what they can be doing can be really instrumental and can really have a huge impact on, making sure that people do have access to medicine. And that's something that I've always been really passionate about. So I want to continue to work on that, and I want to continue to work in this space. But I really want to be a good leader. And I think people often strive to kind of be the smartest person in the room or focus all their energy on kind of being right and looking really good and doing the best job, but they don't focus on kind of creating a really positive work environment. And that's also really important. So I think if you're a bad leader, it will eventually catch up to you. And no one can accomplish as much on their own as they can with a really strong team. So I think it's so instrumental to focus on also being a really good leader and trying in your career to really create that strong and positive environment.
Very nice. To build something kind of beyond yourself, which is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly.
You say definitely, for sure. Now, thinking through, like you said, access to medicine is something that you kind of consider your life's work, something that you've always been interested in. But how have really your past or maybe present experiences really shaped or solidified this outlook for you? And if you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, as a young student, I became really interested in global health. I think for a lot of people, your earlier education is the time for you to kind of figure out what interests you most and sort of see, what potential paths are out there. And for me, I was really lucky to figure that out at a really young age and really want to build on that and to stay focused on that. I think it's easy in life to kind of get distracted by other things and other career paths. But for me, it was really clear that I wanted to be working specifically in global health and on access to medicine. So it was sort of a natural progression for me to kind of continue down that path and try to seek out opportunities that would allow me to work on that most specifically. But I think in terms of experiences in general, I think having one really good leader and really good boss can be enough to kind of shape your style and what you want to achieve and kind of the way that you want to lead. And I find, throughout the years, I think it's inevitable. Everyone experiences a really bad boss, someone that, impacted them negatively. But I think treating that as more of a learning experience and focusing on the really positive people who have really been inspiring to you and instrumental is a really nice way to look at it. And I think as women, we kind of owe it to each other to pass along those positive experiences to those that we end up maybe managing down the road or working with as peers. I think that's a really important component of just kind of seeing something be modeled and then trying your best to kind of replicate that in your own sort of working relationships.
And since you've been kind of in this space for quite some time, thinking about it, have you become more optimistic, you would say, or kind of more excited about what the future is going to hold because we are having more conversations, or the types of conversations are shifting around the topic of access in the pharmaceutical industry and those types of things? Like, are you more optimistic, would you say, given what you've seen and been through?
I think especially over the past 2 years of this pandemic, it's been a really pivotal moment for a lot of people working in global health to kind of contemplate, can we look positively on what has happened and what is in store for the future? And it's certainly been a challenge. And I can admit I've had some bad days where I felt really pessimistic and I felt really negative about the state of global health and health equity. But my hope is that, there is room for optimism and that there are some really key lessons learned from the pandemic that, the whole world will take forward as we move on. And I think I've spoken about it before, but there is a bit of a renewed sense of empathy, I think, amongst the whole global population to fully understand what it means when you actually don't have access to something because it's not yet developed or because it's out of reach or there's not enough supply to go around. It I think really has changed the world and changed how we think about access and what it means to actually make something available to everyone in every corner of the earth. And I do hope that this experience collectively will sort of change the trajectory of how global health is viewed and who supports it, and sort of even just the general public and the media, kind of how they deal with global health issues and how they think about it. So I am cautiously optimistic for sure. And I do hope that, this experience will change the way that we think about global health and the path forward in the future.
Yeah, it is really powerful to think about this pandemic where literally the whole world is experiencing and going through this together. And so, yeah. Now let's just talk a little bit about failures and challenges. You mentioned a little bit about that. Yes, you do recognize there are multiple challenges, but can you share some maybe failures or challenges that you experienced that really shaped your outlook or maybe made you do things differently, and maybe anything you wished you would have done differently or now even make more of a conscious effort to kind of reflecting on those?
I think personally, throughout my career, and I think a lot of people can probably empathize with this, that there's a tendency to kind of jump at good opportunities that come your way. And there's this sort of drive to always say yes to everything, especially when you're younger and you're sort of trying really hard to get these good opportunities. And if something comes your way, you never want to say no. You never want to, give someone an excuse to not give you an opportunity in the future. But I think what's really difficult sometimes is that, an opportunity is not a favor. You've been selected for this because you can do the job at hand and you can do it well. So I think it's important for people to obviously be grateful for what comes your way. New opportunities are really wonderful and can be really instrumental in helping you build those experiences and helping you, really get to where you want to go. But I think it's important to also try to be realistic about what you can take on. And, opportunities are often net new and not what you had planned to do that day or that week or even that month. And so I think it's important, and I've certainly learned over the years, to kind of speak up and say, I am really grateful for this opportunity. It's wonderful. I'm going to have to deprioritize other things to prioritize this, just so this is the capacity that I have right now. And that can be really difficult to do. And it's something I'm still learning to do, but I think it is really important to just, make space for it and to be able to say, I do need help if I'm going to take this on in addition to everything else. So with really good opportunities also come big challenges. And I think that communication piece around, the space that you have to take on new things is also really important to take note of.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because we often think, and I think many of us go through that. And I feel particularly it's something that a lot of my female colleagues as well kind of experience. You kind of feel bad for saying no to an opportunity, right? And you think that it might not come again. And I think the way you approach it allows the other person to, when you're telling them, oh no, I'm not going to be able to, or this is my capacity, they actually really respect that. Most people think that oh, you're feeling bad that you said no to this, but then communicating that is a very strong message of also knowing exactly what you're capable of achieving. And we'll talk a little bit more about creating those supportive environments in a bit. Now let's talk a little bit more about what excites you about the future. What are you really looking forward to? You mentioned a lot that there was a lot of opportunity during this pandemic to talk about this subject, but what does the future look like for you in terms of the positives again?
Yeah, I'm very excited about the new year, and I'm very excited about where we can go as a foundation particularly at the Access to Medicine Foundation in December. We launched our new strategic direction for the next 5 years. And it was really a great experience to work on that new strategy with the team and to be really collaborative and creative about what we want to do and how to solve some of these really important problems that have always been around, but I think have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And so with the launch of that new strategic direction, we've been able to essentially move into new additional sectors that we hadn't previously been formally working on. And that's a really exciting new endeavor for us. Actually, just very recently, our CEO, Jay Ira, published a blog post in the World Economic Forum outlining the importance of our expansion and the need to improve health systems globally and how these key sectors really play into that and are essential to helping to end the pandemic, but also to build back better, because COVID has taught the world so much, and this next year and those following will really lead to more attention, hopefully, on the importance of supporting global health initiatives and how essential cross-sectorial collaboration truly is in building strong and resilient health systems, not sort of looking at it from a very siloed approach, but how can we really build strong health systems? And that's exactly what our work is intending to do.
That's wonderful. So now we talk a lot here about, in this series, about tools or skills or things we need to think about moving forward to kind of address these big challenges in whatever discipline or areas that we're in. So what do you think we need moving forward, whether it be skills, partnerships, whatever it is?
I think partnerships are huge. They're so vital for making sure that goals are actually achieved. If everyone is sort of trying to achieve the same goal, but individually and in silos, it's never going to work. I think also what's really important for us at the Access to Medicine Foundation is these accountability mechanisms and really making sure that what we're researching and what we're working on is grounded in consensus building and stakeholder consultations and understanding the viewpoints of a variety of different stakeholders and sort of how they interact together and the things that they prioritize, and then being able to hold the industry to those standards that we've sort of collectively come to agreement on. And making sure that our research is really grounded in that first and foremost, and then that we're able to develop these new tools. So for example, we're looking at generic medicine manufacturers, low and middle income country vaccine manufacturers, diagnostic companies, and medical gas companies that are delivering medical oxygen. And all of these key players are really essential to health security, to pandemic preparedness, to dealing with the current pandemic, and also just supporting health systems more generally. But being able to work with all of these different partners and new stakeholders is so important, and just developing those tools so that the companies that we're looking at understand what is expected of them, that the global health community is on board, and that we can all kind of collectively work together to achieve those goals and to create better access to all of these different products that are being offered by these different sectors.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's partnerships and the ability to be able to work and recognize what each organ or each entity's incentive structure is and how they'll work is definitely instrumental moving forward for sure. So now let's talk about the present. So we want to provide a little opportunity so that you can highlight some of the exciting things that you're working on. So what current initiatives, you mentioned a few, but that you're working on that you're really excited about and that you would like to share with our audience?
I think the strategic direction is definitely a big one for us, and it will certainly be keeping us busy in the new year. Part of that as well is about an expansion of our work into diabetes specifically, and looking at diabetes treatments and how we can improve access for people living with type 1 diabetes. It's very important to us, and it's been a part of our work for a long time. We're really happy to be able to expand into a bit more of a focus on it. That's a new activity for us. It's embedded in our 5-year strategic plan, but it's a specific new expansion. We're also really excited, just in general, to dig deeper into some of those sectors that I mentioned, particularly our work in medical oxygen was something that began at the very beginning of the pandemic, really. It was not an area that we had currently been working on. In coalition with the Every Breath Counts coalition, we were able to actually expand some of our work on medical oxygen, and we were able to do really important roundtables with a variety of other different partners, and to really start to think about how can these companies who have historically kind of been, not in the spotlight, not really being held accountable, how can we encourage them to do more at such a pivotal moment? And I think all of that work kind of started right before the really big spikes that we were seeing in sort of early 2021 and the catastrophic consequences that we saw in terms of really people running out of medical oxygen. So we were really happy to be able to do something more about it and to focus on sort of how can we utilize our successful theory of change and our model to apply that to a new area of work in new companies. And that's also what kind of spearheaded this new strategic direction and how other sectors could also benefit from our model and how could we ultimately do more. So there's a lot going on in the next few months and year and hopefully years ahead, but it's very exciting work.
And you mentioned something great, because I feel like we've focused so much right now on COVID and COVID-related medications, vaccines, those types of things. And then there's obviously, access to medicine was an issue before the pandemic with all of these other disease states and conditions. And so I think, have you found it easier or difficult to have conversations outside of kind of the COVID-related access to medicine because everyone is more interested in the topic? How have you kind of seen the conversations related to access and the ability to kind of showcase these other, like you had mentioned right now, diabetes being a focus, or the other, health conditions?
It's a great point, and it's something that we've continued to advocate for obviously long before the pandemic and during the pandemic as well, that of course there is this huge opportunity to demonstrate what equity means and why it's so important, but to also not lose sight of the fact that there are all of these other diseases, conditions, and pathogens that have been neglected for many years. There's been efforts to develop vaccines for HIV, for malaria, for TB, and the progress that we saw in COVID in 1 year, all of a sudden we had all of these vaccines for COVID. If we could apply that energy to other disease areas, it could be so impactful. And I think we've seen that where there is a will, there's a way with COVID, and we've seen really miraculous progress in drug development and vaccine development in terms of COVID-19. When there was that attention, when there was that energy put into it. And we really have been advocating for that to be the same for other disease areas as well. And I do hope that there will be, again, more attention on some of these other issues and an understanding that, it does take time and it does take energy and funding, but it's possible and it can happen, and to not lose sight of those other challenges that still really do need a lot of global attention and still really do need, a lot of funding and a lot of R&D to go into them. So I am hopeful that other disease areas hopefully will benefit in the future from some of the same technological advances we've seen over the past year.
Yeah. Definitely, because so many lessons learned, so many structures, so many frameworks that came as a result, and building upon the ability now, because we've created so many partnerships out of the necessity created by the pandemic. But Absolutely. I always say it would be fascinating if we were able to do that. As someone, that speaks about access before the pandemic, now I would get so excited because so many more people are interested in having this conversation because they see the ripple effects, beyond that. So I think that was just kind of the exciting part, because I'd never talked so much about access to medicine, at least to the public, in terms of the diversity of people that are interested in it, right? So I think that's definitely exciting. But what would you say are some challenges or obstacles that really keep you up at night, or something that you really think about and kind of worries you?
For sure, I would say still vaccine equity is unfortunately such a catastrophic issue. Again, we're now, 2 years into the pandemic almost, and vaccines have been around for over a year, and yet still we're not seeing, strong numbers of vaccination in lower income countries, and still we're on, boosters in many high income countries when, so many people have not even received a single dose in low and middle income countries. So it's definitely something that will, I think, continue to keep a lot of people up at night until, the pandemic is actually fully, resolved or manageable on a global scale. We're nowhere near that yet. It's going to be, a lot longer until that is the case. And I think the understanding in general should be that we won't get there unless there is vaccine equity. And until that happens, this will just continue to circle around. And viruses know no borders. Variants will continue to develop when the virus is left unchecked. This isn't the last variant that we'll see. There will be others if this is sort of the general strategy of, vaccinate one's own population before the rest of the world and those who need it the most. So it's something that will, I think, continue to keep many, many global health people up at night, not just me, but we've been calling for this for a long time. Again, health equity being so critical, not just for vaccines, but also medicines and diagnostics and those essential treatments like medical oxygen, since the start of the pandemic and beforehand. So those issues don't end here, and we'll continue to need to advocate for them and continue to need to just propel that message further down the road.
Yeah, for sure. Now, let's talk a little bit about success. When you're involved in a lot of initiatives, you obviously, or even yourself, your own professional success or within the initiatives that you work on, is there a definition that you use or you kind of live by for the word success, or what success really means to you?
Success to me, I think, is maybe a more simplistic way of looking at it than for maybe some others. But success for me is feeling as though I'm in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. And it's honestly not more complicated than that. I try not to compare myself to others, although that's always a challenge, I think, for everyone. But I try to think about what I want for my own career and my own timelines and evaluate myself against those goals and ambitions instead of someone else's, because I think it's quite easy, especially in this day and age with, so many things on LinkedIn and Twitter and just, the internet. You see people and think, wow, they're doing so amazing. And it's hard not to let that sort of interfere with your own sort of career trajectory and where you want to go and what you want to be doing. But I think it's helpful to just always kind of think about how you personally define success and what you think it means, and to try to keep that in mind when evaluating how you're doing against your own goals.
I love that, because what I'm hearing is to be grounded, to be present. That whole idea of the right place at the right time to do the right thing is incredible, because it really brings you back to what is it that you can do at that moment. And if you're doing that, right, ultimately it's doing the right thing, right, too, because then you feel like you succeed at that moment. That's actually a wonderful definition, Margo. So we first think about success as our own individual success oftentimes, and then we think even for our own success, we know and talk a lot about creating environments for success, whether individual, teams, communities, whatnot. How do you feel like, or what do you do to kind of create that environment for success that's kind of beyond yourself, recognizing that you can't really control everything?
I think a successful environment is one where there's a lot of trust, and that there's, this culture of kind of genuine support. And, I always try to learn as much as I can from those around me and from those on my team, and sort of how they work, how individual people kind of experience things, and the way that they work and their work ethic and their work style. Because I think that's always helpful to just try to build a collaborative team. And I also think that it's kind of helpful when you're thinking about success to look at things that have gone really well, to look at sort of what other teams have done well or what other individuals have done well, and how they've gotten to the point where they achieve their goal, kind of see if some of those steps could be applicable to your case or your team's case, and to just really try to build an environment that feels constructive and supportive and trusting, and then I feel like the rest kind of follows. I think if you're trying to achieve success in a very negative, toxic environment, it's almost impossible. And it's really so much more efficient and faster to get things done if people feel supported and feel like they can trust one another, and they're able to really achieve the things that they're setting out to achieve. I think it's a much easier process rather than, again, a sort of toxic environment that just doesn't serve anyone.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I was recently having a conversation with a colleague too that transitioned into a new leadership position. And the first thing that she told me, because I was asking her, are you excited about it? She said, it seems like the team is very supportive. That was like the first thing. And I was like, well, that sounds like a wonderful environment to be in, right? Because especially if something is new to you, or you need to build something, or you're growing personally, or your team is growing, that supportive underlying theme is so instrumental. So actually that pertains a lot to the next question we talk about in terms of seeking support, because oftentimes, and I know this can be particularly the case, even if you are a leader, some leaders are actually shy to ask for help, or feel like, they need to, make it seem like it's kind of a weakness if they do ask for help. So how do you, what are your thoughts on seeking support? Having a supportive environment is really important, but oftentimes we need to ask for help, or ask others to help us. So how do you prioritize these conversations, and any advice that you can provide our audience on how to best do that when they do need support?
It's such an important question. And I think a lot of people do struggle with asking for help and asking for support. I definitely do. It's one that I can certainly resonate with. It's tough, especially as we were talking about earlier, when you want to be seen as someone who can take on any challenge, and who can just keep adding to the workload without kind of pausing and saying, I actually do really need help with this. But it's so important, and I think, again, if you can create an environment that is supportive and people feel that they can ask for help, then that can be really, instrumental in creating positive change, because they feel they can ask when they need something, or when they have a question. But it's difficult, and I think it's just really about, as a leader, if you can sort of try to demonstrate that too, and show when you need help and when you don't know the answer to every question. I think that can help sort of demonstrate what's acceptable in a team, and show people that they too can ask for help, and they're not expected to know everything all the time, and that you can ask people when you need something. But I think what's also really helpful in that and achieving that supportive environment is feedback. And I think we're each our own biggest critic, for sure. And I think sometimes there's this assumption that if there's no positive feedback, it's because everything's going really well, and you don't always need positive feedback, and that if it's not said, it's a given. And to be honest, that can be really difficult, because I think if it's only coupled with negative constructive feedback about how we can improve as a team and how we can do things better, and there's never this moment to pause and say, that was really great, or this initiative went really well, or you did this really well, and this came out, excellent. Those are really important moments too. And finding that balance of helping to coach people and helping to get constructive feedback, either give it or receive it, at the same time as having, really positive feedback as well, and celebrating the big ones and the little wins. I think that's what's really important, and creating that nice balanced environment is essential to having a strong team, and to improving people's performance, and helping them be the best that they can be in a specific role.
Yeah, I really like that. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about leadership in general. We ask all of our guest leaders a question on leadership, and that is, how would you describe a leader? You responded with the following: I think there's a big difference between a leader and a good leader, which I think you've also been mentioning. All leaders need to make decisions, set direction, and build teams to execute tasks. Good leaders do so by creating and fostering a highly supportive and motivating environment that brings out the best in people, promotes efficiency and trust within and across effective teams, and helps achieve sustainable organizational progress. Can you elaborate a little bit more? You've been talking about this, but really what's shaped this outlook for you?
I think in general, being a good leader requires a lot of skills, and it's never something that you can just check off, oh, I'm a good leader now. I think it's a process of constantly kind of reevaluating how you see things, how you are, addressing people, how you're managing a project. And I think a good leader is really just someone who is constantly trying to be a better leader and trying to understand what their blind spots are, and maybe, where they're lacking in their leadership skills, and being able to take constructive feedback also from those they are managing, I think is a really important point as well, because sometimes it's those who are not, the superior, but are actually those that, that person is managing, that can be really helpful in saying, that was not the most efficient way of communicating, or, this was, something that sort of rubbed me the wrong way, or, I think there's a huge learning in sort of how you are as a manager by speaking to the people that you directly manage and learning from them. And I think good leaders really do want to be better and want to take that constructive feedback and that advice and improve how they manage, and not just see it as, oh, I'm a good leader, I don't need to do any work ever again. It's sort of a continuous process throughout your career to be a good leader, and no one is perfect and no one is ever going to check that box. It's always about learning. It's always about improving and seeing what you can do better.
Yeah, for sure. In the conversations around leadership, I feel like leadership is one of those topics or areas people are particularly interested in. There's so many books and resources and things. But over the years, have you found this trend of things that you're hearing about leadership that you think we're getting wrong?
I think there has been a really positive momentum to take a really important look at diversity, equity, and inclusion and what that means for leadership. And I think it's so essential and so vital. And there's so far that we need to go collectively as a society in that regard. And I do hope that that is becoming more mainstream and not something that is sort of an afterthought, or particular organizations will look at it, but others feel that they don't need to. And I would like to see that be more front and center, especially when it comes to, people who are managing really diverse teams. They should have that training. If they have other types of leadership training, why not that too? Because it's so essential. And I think having a really diverse team with different experiences and different backgrounds and different viewpoints is so beneficial to the goal, because it enables you to sort of think outside the box and think differently, and just, build a really strong, diverse team. And without that training, I think a lot of people aren't aware of the things that they're missing, and aren't aware of their blind spots, and aren't aware of their biases. And it's so essential to being a good leader. And again, it's that sort of continuous effort to improve and think differently, and sort of realize where you're doing things wrong and where you could be doing things better. And it's such an important element that I think is starting to become more mainstream, but I'd like it to be much greater than it currently is.
Yeah, definitely like it to be part of the DNA of leaders, right?
Exactly.
That it's kind of like a given, for sure. Now, what leadership advice or lessons can you provide to our current or future leaders, both men and women, really at different stages of their career?
I viewed my career trajectory, I think, a bit differently than maybe what we would assume is normal. I kind of have always thought of it as a bit of a Tetris game instead of a ladder. So that career ladder, to me, I always felt a bit anxious about it, because I was really concerned that I would start climbing a ladder and it would be the wrong ladder. And then all of a sudden you get to the top, but that's not where you actually want to be. Sure, maybe the title is what you want, or the position, or the pay grade, but the actual work is not what you want to be doing. And so I've always seen it as, similar to a Tetris game. Take a couple of steps. Maybe it's a bilateral move. Maybe it's not necessarily an upward progression, but you're moving to a team that you really like, that's super interesting to you, or you're moving to an organization that really speaks to what you want to be working on. And maybe it's even a little bit of a step back in terms of the title or the pay, but it gets you much closer to where you want to go in the end, versus, again, that ladder that maybe isn't the right one. So that's kind of how I've viewed my career, and the opportunities that I've taken, and the sort of path that I've been on has always sort of fallen under that strange, not straightforward, not straight line path. But I've been again happy with where I ended up. So for me, it worked.
Yeah, that's so great. Wonderful advice, actually. And you can still tie in, it really ties in well too with your definition of success, because you then literally take wherever and whatever position you are, it doesn't necessarily have to be that ladder. You are then successful, quote unquote, focus on that right place, the right time, doing the right thing within that. And then that does lead to kind of a successful career there. Now, before we go into the audience questions, we do have a last question, because we would like to take an opportunity to support one another and really recognize the positive influence we have on one another. Can you name a woman or two, because others have cheated on this, that has inspired you, and why did you choose this person?
I think I've alluded to it already in this chat, but I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of amazing and inspiring women leaders, both as those who have been kind of my boss, as well as those who have been on my team, either someone I was managing or someone that I was just, working alongside. And I've said it as well, but I think a lot of times you can learn so much from people that you're just working with. It doesn't have to be the person who's the most senior in the room. It's just the team itself. And I think it's really difficult to speak up and to kind of let people know what your boundaries are, and what you think is acceptable or not, and when you're feeling overwhelmed, and when you're feeling like, this is too much for me to handle. And you mentioned it as well. Sometimes that's not appreciated as much as, take on everything that you can and move forward and work, until the wee hours of the night, and don't say anything about it. So I've always really respected people and been inspired by people who are able to do that, and who are able to say, I need to take a step back. And without naming names, I have a very close friend of mine who was actually a colleague several years ago, and she is an absolute powerhouse. I've always been really inspired by her work ethic and her determination, and her advice has helped me so much in terms of taking different paths and different opportunities. But she really recently made quite a difficult decision to take a step back, take some time off for personal reasons. And I respect her even more for it. I think developing those boundaries and setting them can be so challenging, but I'm really proud of her in this moment that she was able to actually say, I need this time. And knowing your limits, to me, is a huge part of being a good leader. So I would definitely say she's been a constant source of inspiration.
Yeah. And thank you for mentioning that too, with that example, because, and it gets back to the theme of being a good leader. You can still be a good leader without that position title. So like you said, you still really respect, even if they took a step back, because most people tie their leadership or their ability with the title that they have at that moment. But if you're a good leader, right, you're a good person and you're that powerhouse, people are still going to respect you, regardless if you have that title at that moment there, because you're still perceived of the influence that you've had as a good leader. So thank you for mentioning that. I think that's really also very important. Now let's go on to some of the audience questions that we got. Margo, you got a lot, so we have to definitely sort through some of these. So the first one, I think, and it speaks to your interest in equity as well, but what strategies should we use to really improve access, particularly to those communities that are the most vulnerable? So is there things that we should keep in mind here?
The Access to Medicine Foundation has a lot of different strategies that we look at when it comes to making new medicines or vaccines or diagnostics available to those specifically living in low-income countries. One of the things that we've been advocating for quite some time is access planning. So what we mean by that is, while projects are still in the pipeline in sort of phase 2 and onwards, we really encourage companies to think about how they're going to make them available and affordable in different countries. So we want to see them consider, with a really strong articulated plan, this is where I'm going to register this product. If the disease burden is particularly high in these countries, so this is where we're going to start. We know that ability to pay is very low, so we're going to look at equitable pricing strategies, or we're going to partner with different big procurement agencies and offer a really good rate, or we're going to think about the use of a non-exclusive voluntary license so we can make it available by a generic company. So there's a very clear plan that we want to see from companies in the scope of our work and those that we're evaluating. And we have seen a lot of progress actually in this area over the years. We actually saw about a 60% increase in this in regards to particularly stewardship and access planning for treatments for antimicrobial resistance. And that was really nice to see that increase over the previous antimicrobial resistance benchmark that was published in 2020. And that improvement is really positive to see when it comes to the industry and thinking about how they can do better. But we also want to see access strategies for products that are on the market. So we also encourage companies to think really strategically about, what can they be doing for products that have been out there even for a year or maybe 10 years or even 20 years. What are you doing to make this available? Are you thinking about the local level of ability to pay in a particular country? Are you thinking about, if you're not in that market, are you going to consider, again, the use of a non-exclusive voluntary license so that a generic company who is can make it and distribute it and make sure that it's available for those populations that need it the most? So we have quite a variety of different strategies that we look at in the context of the index and of the context of the antimicrobial resistance benchmark, but those are just a couple examples of what companies can be doing to think more strategically about access, both in the pipeline and for products that are actually on the market.
Yeah, and that'll help really lay down the infrastructure needed then to improve access, correct? So the other question pertains to, I think this is really applicable, Margo, also given your background in terms of engaging with very diverse stakeholders and making partnerships such a priority. You're going to be talking with very diverse types of people. So how do you productively engage with those that maybe you disagree with on specific topics or don't necessarily see it the same way you do?
I think using empathy as much as possible is a really good strategy, and trying to see sort of what angle are they coming at a topic from, what are they most concerned about, where are you not sort of able to meet halfway for a variety of different reasons and why, and kind of coming to a discussion with those already in mind so that things aren't surprising or they don't catch you off guard. That's always how I think we try to approach difficult discussions. And often it is creating that scenario where they're in the same room together and they can hear from one another, whether it be, about a particular access topic or, something that is, very divisive between, say, the industry and governments or multilaterals. And we actually have a series of Amsterdam sessions, is what we call them, where we bring together a variety of different partners in kind of a closed door approach. They're not always sort of huge public events, but rather moments for different partners to connect and to discuss critical topics and to have that, really productive dialogue and to say, this is where we're coming from. These are the challenges that we're facing. And for others to say, this is why we're trying to prioritize this. This is why we think it's most important, and to try to facilitate those conversations, because sometimes it really is just getting them in the same room. And if you can get people in the same room talking about something that they, do both feel passionate about, but are coming from very different angles, you can still have a really productive conversation, particularly when you can make that positive environment for them to feel comfortable speaking to one another without it being necessarily a hugely public event where they maybe would be a bit more scripted or would stick to sort of the party lines that they'd always sort of felt they had to say. But that's definitely a strategy that we use, and I think it applies as well to big events or small events or bilateral conversations in general. It's just getting the right people in the room and having a really open, honest dialogue about the challenges that they're each facing.
Yeah, and being able then to truly listen to each side without judgment and be able to come, because we often so focus on, yes, getting to that middle ground, but we don't really listen to each other, right? And having those open conversations are really important for sure. The other question focuses more on misinformation. How do you believe we can reduce misinformation, particularly in global health?
Transparency is huge, I think, when it comes to reducing misinformation. I think there's a lot of assumptions that are made. People say things sort of behind closed doors, but when you are able to encourage different parties to actually put something in the public domain, which is ultimately what we're able to do through our research reports, it can be really valuable because it can also help debunk some of those myths. So for example, in the context of our work, we have best practices where we identify sort of specific things that individual companies are doing that are actually positive. And sometimes, there's one company that's doing something, and all of the other companies will say, oh, that's impossible. We can't do that. That would never work. This is just totally unrealistic. And then we have one company actually do it, and we can highlight that practice. For example, when we look at strategic access planning for, the whole portfolio, not just one or two specific projects, we saw actually Novartis be the first company in 2018 to actually say, we'll systematically plan across our whole portfolio, and they received a best practice for it in the index. And all the other companies sort of said, oh, we can't do that. We can't possibly do that. And then in the next iteration of the index, all of a sudden, there were all these other companies that were willing to follow suit and were willing to also make a similar commitment. So we did see that by putting that in the public domain, by highlighting that commitment, that it debunked this myth that it was impossible. And so other companies were actually able to do it as well. And that's a common theme throughout our work as well, is identifying where there is sort of misinformation about what's possible and what's not possible, or what can be done and what can't be done, and then showing and demonstrating that it actually is possible, and some people are doing it. And then that really does help, I think, mitigate some of that misinformation about sort of negative perceptions of what's possible or not.
That's a good point. The next question pertains to, and I would love for you to answer this both personally and in the line of work that you do, in terms of how you prioritize what you work on. So obviously access to medicines is a very big topic, and there are many medications or many disease states, pathogens, everything like you mentioned. So how do you prioritize where you put your efforts there? And then also on an individual perspective, a lot of our audience are very ambitious people. They have a lot of different interests as well. So how do you begin to prioritize what to work on?
As a foundation, we are fortunate in that we work under a very strict methodological approach, and that helps us really define our scopes quite clearly and quite easily, because we do have this sort of strict way of thinking about what's included in our scope and what's not. We look at disease burdens, we look at sort of the different country scopes and disease scopes and the specific company scopes. And so we're able to be quite clear about sort of how we work and what we work on. When it comes to new programs, we sort of think, where can our model be best applied? We tend to find that based on our theory of change, when there's a very strong concentration in the market with a few different players, that's where we can have the most impact. If it's a hugely saturated market with, say, 100 different companies, it's very difficult to actually move them. But when it's a concentrated group, we find it can be really instrumental. If one moves, 2 or 3 or 4 others move, and you can kind of create that natural, healthy competition amongst peers, and they want to outcompete each other and they want to do better, and ultimately that results in them making, better efforts towards access to medicine. So as a foundation, that's sort of the general approach that we've used. Individually, I would say, I think the advice I got many years ago was do the things that bring you energy and focus on the things that make you happy, but also bring you to life. And if you're feeling really, demotivated and unhappy, it's probably a good sign that that's not maybe the right thing to be prioritizing and focusing on when you have control of sort of what you're able to do and not do. And to really focus on the things that do, really bring you energy and make you excited and make you happy, and try to focus on those. And I think it's easy to say in your personal life. And then I think some people would say, well, in your professional life, it's really difficult. But I think there's still, take the opportunity that really excites you, or go for that initiative that you really do want to be working on, versus, sticking to the things that, maybe have always come to your plate without you needing to sort of speak up and say, actually, I'd really like to work on this project instead.
Yeah, wonderful advice. Now we're almost at time. So I do want to allow you just to have any other closing remarks or advice that you haven't already mentioned that you would like to leave us with.
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, that's a tough one. I think we've talked a lot about a lot of different things and touched on some really good points. I would just again reiterate, I think there's been a lot of lessons learned over the past 2 years, I think individually, in terms of what people value and what people want to focus on and devote their lives to, and also kind of collectively and within the global health community, where can we be doing better? What can we be doing more of? And how can we apply these lessons and improve things for the future? So I'm just, optimistic that hopefully we can move forward and that, things will get better, and that these lessons will sit with us for a long time, and that, they won't sort of come and go, and we'll end up in the same position we were in early 2020, 5-10 years from now. So I'm hopeful, but I think there's a lot of important learnings that we need to take into consideration in order to make that happen.
Definitely, for sure. So thank you, Margo. This conversation has been absolutely wonderful. And I know that the audience will greatly appreciate it as well. So thanks again for taking the time to be with us today. I learned a lot in terms of kind of your own individual approach, but I think such a big topic like access to medications will really require us to do a lot of the things that you had mentioned in terms of making sure we build strong partnerships, that the diversity of the partnership should reflect our world, right? And the diversity of issues that we all have as well. But to be very well grounded. I have absolutely loved your definition of success, and I'm definitely going to write that down and use it as well. So thank you again. And then for those that are listening, we also have several other guest leaders in the coming weeks. So please be sure to submit any questions that you have for them as well. And we look forward to seeing you in the next one.